Guys, I know we're in the beginning parts, but if I have a laptop or something to take notes with, I encourage you to use the slides that I'm posting. Guys, a few of you are having trouble posting this week's assignment, so I'm going to show you where you can find that in Canvas. I'm asking you to take the definition you came up with your group for human resource management. And if you were not part of a group, if you're new to the class today, that's okay. I'm going to ask you to come up with your own definition based on your own ideas of what human resource management is if you were not part of a group. And where you post that, if you get onto your Canvas and go to Modules and go to Chapter 1, under Chapter 1 Assignment, you can either upload that as a Word file or you can type it right in. That's where I'm asking you to submit it. So again, if you were part of a group, submit your group's definition. If you were not part of a group, submit your own definition, and there is no wrong answer on this one. 1 to 3 sentences will suffice. The reason I do this is because at the end of the semester, we come back and I ask you to reevaluate your first definition to see if your opinion or initial impressions changed. So this is an easy 10 points. Yes, sir?
Can we do bullet point format?
Wonderful. Yep. However you want to present it. What I do ask those, for example, in times past, people have handwritten it and they've actually submitted a picture of it, of their handwriting. Actually type it in. Type it in. Bullet points are absolutely fine. Other questions about the assignment? And for those of you who are still getting familiar, if you go to Modules, for example, you can also go back and download the slides that we're going to be following along with today. I encourage you to feel free to do that while we get into the material today. So, to kind of check in, what I'm asking you to do also is on our page to check out the syllabus, get the textbook. If you have not gotten the textbook yet, please get a copy of it. If you were using an older copy, if you've been given an older copy, stop and see me so we can make sure it's going to be relevant because the law changes. And the text looks like this. So we've got Chapter 1 that we're hitting into right now. We're getting into the basics of human resource management. Now, as I mentioned in the last class, in our first class, what you are in right now is a community-engaged class, which means some of the work we do in this class is going to help our community. The group we're working with is called the Center for Community Action, and they're based out of Altoona, Pennsylvania. What the entire mission of this group, the Center for Community Action, is to help low-income and difficult-to-employ people find opportunities. We're going to help those folks be better prepared for the job market by giving them seminars and training. Now, we're going to figure that out more as we get into the semester, who will be doing what. But everybody in this class will be required to do about 5 hours of work on this. And that can be behind the scenes here. It can be actually delivering content in person. Here's what I'll tell you. If you have a social bent, if you enjoy doing good things in your community, this will be one of the most rewarding things you may get to do this year. These folks are very appreciative of the services we give them, and you're helping folks who are on the margins of society. Next Friday, we're going to have 2 representatives from the Center for Community Action who are coming here to talk to you about what CCA does and the kinds of work we're going to be doing. The program we're going to be using was actually developed by our St. Francis and Actus team, and that is called UWork, and that stands for Workforce Opportunities Through Resources and Knowledge. You may discover you have a passion for nonprofits. You may discover that you don't. We're going to work together on this one, and we're going to figure it out. In terms of getting back and forth to the site, we're going to also be providing transportation. We will figure out all those logistics as we go. You may say, I travel for competition. This is going to be hard for me. No worries. We're going to find ways to make this work with everybody's schedule. If you can't come on site, there's things we can do off site as well. We'll be fleshing this out as we get through the semester. Guys, we're going to start off with some current events, though, to get us in today. Check this out. The Los Angeles Times just ended up paying out $15.4 million because of a discrimination lawsuit. Basically, we had a sports writer for the LA Times who all of a sudden discovered his column that he was writing for the paper was getting reduced in size. He was getting less notoriety. And then the column was eliminated altogether. At the same time that the paper claimed his work quality was going down, he claimed he was suffering migraine headaches. He eventually quit, saying the way he was being treated for his lack of productivity was an intolerable work condition, and he sued the paper. The lawsuit was overturned in a later court. Well, upon appeal, there was a second trial, and the judge threw out the working conditions claim, but awarded a claim to the individual based on age discrimination. What really came down to the law, the letter of the law, you're going to learn this when we start talking about discrimination, that the individual was regarded differently for being a person of a certain age. Guys, why is this an important case for us to consider in 2019 and beyond. The age discrimination angle, why is that so important for us to think about these days? Anybody have a guess? Yes, sir.
People are working longer. Like, they're not, people not leaving jobs as soon as they want to work. So, we're getting reports that employees that are at that age.
Corey's got it. He's absolutely correct. Other input. That's a great answer. Anything else you want to add?
Say that baby boomers get older, starting off at about 65, and even in positions, you see more stuff like this be relevant.
You're absolutely correct. You guys are both correct. Here's what else is happening, guys. In the financial crash of 2008, what happened to people's retirement plans? Anybody remember what was the financial crash of 2008 all about? Do you remember? It was real estate. Well, when you're talking about 401ks and benefit plans and retirement plans, where's a substantial portion of our retirement's invested? Real estate. So you literally were talking about people who were 2 and 3 years out from retirement who lost over half of their worth in less than a year. Imagine this, guys. Put yourself in this position. You've got $1 million stocked away and you're ready for a great retirement at 65. 6 months later, all of a sudden, you have $500,000. Is that going to change your plans? Yeah, absolutely. So people are staying in the workplace longer. Why else are older people staying in the workplace longer? Yes?
It's more expensive to live.
It is. So the old adage was, if I could plan for 10 to 15 years past retirement and have enough money, I'd be okay. Does anybody know what the average life expectancy is for a female in your age group? About 85. So what that means, if you retire at 65, you got to have enough money for 20 years. Most people in these generations did not. So that's one aspect of this. One of the other aspects is, in terms of these people living longer, what else do they want to maintain besides the fact they have to maintain a living wage? What else? What's something I'm more likely to use than you guys are? It's a benefit of a company. You got it. Who's more likely to have more chronic conditions? Somebody who is 18 to 22 or somebody who's 40 to whatever. So we're going to use more of those resources. So my point is the changing demographic, and these kinds of lawsuits are going to seem more frequent than less because people are working longer for a lot of reasons. Yes, sir?
How do you win like 15 million? How do you win 15 million?
I still didn't hear. I'm sorry.
How did you win like 15 million?
Well, the answer is you hire the right lawyer. And if you have the right person who can point out that there were damages and everything else. This is one thing, too, Corey, you'll see in this class, that a lot of the time the law is not equally enforced from one person to the next. And a lot of the time it depends how good of a lawyer can you afford. As we saw on Monday, we started talking about the peyote case and the gentleman from the Native American Church. If he had a different attorney, that case might have had a different outcome as well. So we start getting into punitive damages and all that stuff. Now, the $15 million, I guarantee you that verdict will get appealed, and they'll try to get that amount down. But it's a symbolic kind of thing. It's a great question you asked, Bill. Other questions? Let's continue, guys. Here's something else that was in the news as of late. We had an employee a company called SoftPro, which was a software company, who took medical leave. Just like you can take sick time. I'm taking 2 weeks off because I need to get health care. He came back to work, and he was questioned, okay, you had 14 days out, where were you? And he answered honestly. I was at a rehab clinic because I've got an opioid addiction. His employer fired him, and the case went to court. Who won? Who says the employee? By show of hands. Who says the employer? Who says, I don't know, but I'm going to raise my hand because I don't know? It's okay not to know. Guys, the employee won the case. Does anybody know why? I'm sorry? Well, yeah, he showed up for work. He didn't miss work over it. That's absolutely true. Anybody have another guess why he might have won this case? Yes.
Maybe he didn't affect his job.
Yeah, he was still doing good work. There's another one. It's a tricky answer to this question. One more guess. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a guess? So, although I think that would be a good reason too, what the real reason was, in the United States of America, if you are a recovering drug addict, if you are somebody who is actively seeking treatment for your condition and is not using, you can be considered covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So in essence, by punishing him for seeking treatment, they were punishing him in the same context of punishing somebody who were using a wheelchair to get around in a building. That's how the law can be applied. That's why not discriminating can be tricky. That's why being in HR and working with modern law can be tricky. We're going to be talking about lots of these kind of cases during the course of the semester and how we apply this law. Any questions or comments? Do you agree with the judge on this one or not? What are your thoughts? What do you think, guys? Yes.
His choice, right?
Yeah, well, the judge is definitely taking his interpretation of the law to apply to drug addicts as well. Mike, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, can you repeat
the question? The question is, do you think that this disability, the drug addiction, should be covered as a disability? That's really the more fundamental question I failed to ask. What do you think? Yes?
I think it should, just because we're going through such an epidemic right now with it. If people are trying to seek help, then they should be covered under that.
So we should offer people incentives to say, instead of covering up this problem, why don't you seek help instead of treating it as punishment? Anybody else have an opinion on this? That's a great point. Yes.
I agree with what she said. Instead of covering up and hiding it, I feel like you should be able to be open with your employer, what you're going through, especially if you're trying to do better.
Please keep going.
I think the next step of this could be like companies paying for it so they have more productive workers.
I think they might have to. And when we talk about the opioid epidemic, when I say this, I don't mean to be on a soapbox. I'm just saying what's happening. How many of you, by show of hands, are from somewhere in this local community? Okay, we have some folks who are local. I'm local as well. In the Johnstown region of Pennsylvania, I work with a group called the Healing Patch, which deals with children who have suffered the loss of a loved one. Out of every 10 kids who are coming into that program in 2019, 6 of them have lost someone to drug addiction. Johnstown is the epicenter of Pennsylvania's opioid epidemic. And I think employers getting involved in this stuff, in addition to helping somebody else, could this create more loyal employees as well? I mean, you're showing your employees you care about them. So you're essentially building a loyal workforce, taking care of people at the same time, and helping deal with an issue. And let's face it, in the opioid epidemic, the people who are the users are not the only victims. So any other last opinions before we jump into the material for today? Guys, by the way, the kind of stuff I'm talking about here, when I make the statement that you can do a guest lecture on a subject of your choice, this sort of stuff fits in with that as well. So if there's something in particular where the light bulb goes off and you're saying, I'd really like to lead a discussion about that, I would support you 200%. What we're going to be doing today, guys, is really talking about how things work in the world of human resource management. What we're talking about here is how HR actually works in organizations. So the objective of this chapter is to really define human resource management for you and give you some key concepts. We're going to talk about why it's important, how HR builds competencies in organizations. Think about this, guys. We need skills for organizations to work, and we're going to talk about HR's role in that. We're also going to talk about some of the big challenges facing HR. Now, along with all these challenges, we've also got ethical issues. Who can think, in terms of what HR does, what might be a potential ethical issue we might have to deal with? What might be an ethical issue in HR? When you think about some of the things we do, what does HR do? Think about your definitions. Tell me one thing that HR does. Rule enforcers, for sure. What else does HR do? Yes? Develop employees. And one more. We have employees coming and going. I mean what? Hiring and firing. In all those scenarios, hiring and firing in particular, can you think of a scenario where we might have an ethical issue to deal with? Yes? That's definitely true. Are we going to accommodate people or not? Are we going to be ethical about that or not? And we start talking about hiring and firing. Let's say, for example, I'm on a search committee, and my second cousin is applying for the job, and he's not the most qualified there. Am I making an ethical decision by getting my cousin a job, or should I be looking at the person who's best qualified? Those are examples of how we deal with ethical issues. And finally, we're going to talk about why competencies are required. What competencies are required by people in this field as well. So you guys did a pretty good job, I think, of defining what HR is. What it really is is the idea of taking people and accomplishing the goals of the company through people. Until AI replaces all of us, until there's carts that roam around Martins do everything for us, there's still going to be people in organizations. So how do we develop people to meet the goals of the organization? You got to hire the right people for the job, and you got to know what skills are required to get the right person in the door. So why do organizations need us? Well, the bottom line, guys, nobody comes out of trade school, high school, college, or whatever program ready to be 100% in the workforce. So we got to develop those folks. We also have to make sure that we've got what we refer to as bench strength. Who are my baseball fans in here? Who likes baseball? So when I say bench strength, what am I talking about? Exactly right. And we can apply that same concept in an organization. Bench strength means you've got more than one person who can do a job. That you've got a leader in waiting who's ready to come in and be that person who could become that someone when we need a new boss. So that's all stuff that HR does. Some of the other things we do, we manage benefits. Guys, if I make $100,000 a year, if I were making $100,000 my first job out of college, and some of the folks who were in my last class know the answer to this question, how much am I actually being paid? When you account for my benefits and everything else, what am I actually worth to a company financially? If I make $100,000 a year, about 130. You're absolutely correct. And so this means we got to manage that stuff because the most expensive part of companies, besides hiring people, is paying for their benefits. Guys, I'm here to tell you too, no matter what company you work for these days, it's probably going to have international ties. No matter what industry you're in, you're either selling to people in another country or you're getting supplies from another country, and you might even be managing staff in another country, meaning we have to be international. And in this current rapid-paced environment, we got to know how to share information. Guys, I want you to think about something. Think about the last time you had dinner with your grandparents. And think about the way you interact with your friends and the way your grandparents interact with their friends. If you had to ask one of your friends, hey, let's go to dinner tonight, if you weren't sitting next to that person, what's a way you would likely contact that person? Text messages. How many times in a given day do you guys use social media? It's hard to count. Have you ever done the statistics on your smartphone to see just how much you're using your phone? What's the highest you've got? And compare that to your grandparents who you're teaching how to use their iPhones. Here's the trick. People as old as your grandparents are working with people younger than you in the same workplace. How do we manage and train and develop those folks when we're in all senses and purposes from different cultures? And that means if we're trying to share information between employees, we've also got to deal with the fact we've got diversity not just from a race or a gender standpoint, but from a generational standpoint. We also got to deal with the law. Guys, in my last class, you guys know what the answer to this, so I'm going to ask anybody who's in labor law to abstain from answering this question. But in the United States, what is the required maximum work week? How many hours? What is the standard for our work week? 40 hours. If you work more than 40 hours, what do you have to pay somebody? You got it. Time and a half or compensatory time. That's an example of legal compliance. If Becky's working for me and she works 55 hours this week and I ask her, well, that extra 15 hours, will you say that we'll put it against next week and I'll just let you have 15 hours off? I'm breaking the law. So we have to stay in compliance. We also have to make sure we're treating people well, that we are giving them safe working environments. And that's why we have organizations like OSHA. We also have to have discipline. You know, it's one of these things that even though HR is a strategic function, we got to take care of things that are going wrong as well. In addition, we have to train people. We say small organization and HR support. Small companies sometimes are the ones who break the rules the most frequently. Because if you're working in a small company, one of the people who's a manager or is doing another job might also be your HR person. We're a medium-sized company here at St. Francis. We have our own HR department. A small mom and pop shop might not have that ability. And in addition, you have to train people how to do performance evaluations. These are all functions. Has anybody here in the course of their job ever had a performance evaluation? You ever had somebody tell you if you're doing a good job or a bad job on the job? Can you tell me about it? There's an informal performance evaluation. Excellent. Well, guys, in terms of larger and more formal organizations, the performance management process becomes more formal as well. And why do people care about performance evaluations in bigger companies? What could be dependent on those? What might be based on? Yes. You got it, man. You're doing a better job than I am, and our manager evaluates both of us. If he doesn't see you're doing a better job than me, and we both get the same raise, that's not fair to you, is it? And that manager may not have been well trained in how to do that. So again, by having HR departments that are proactive, we get more people trained. HR departments, however, just managing people isn't enough. We have to know what our companies are all about. I'm going to name a company name, and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. Apple. Yeah, Apple. Technology, phones. Nike. Shoes, absolutely. Steelers. I guess it depends who I ask in this room if you like the Steelers or not. My point is, all of these brands that I mentioned to you have a core competency. When you say Apple, people aren't saying shoes because Apple doesn't make shoes. They make high-end phones. If I say Nike, even though Nike makes a full range of apparel, we all think about shoes first. That's their core competency. HR departments need to know what their company is all about, both from a competency standpoint and from a culture standpoint. So you hire people with the right skills, and you hire people who also fit with your company's culture. Let me give you an example. We're going to get into culture here shortly. Actually, I'll hold off on the example until we get to the cultural part. The bottom line is you have to develop people in your company who fit. Let me ask you something. I'm going to use the iPhone as an example. I've got an older phone, but this is an iPhone 6. What did it take to make this phone? Tell me something that went into making this phone. So we definitely have chips where people had to develop the inner workings of this phone, for sure. What else went into it? Yes? Glass, for sure. And that's a very specific kind of glass that we use on the surface of the phone. And somebody, probably at Apple, if they weren't making the glass, you had to have a buyer who went out and found the right glass. What else went into this phone? Yes? Yeah, the battery's a huge part of it. Somebody else had to make that. Would this phone, would its components matter if you didn't know about it? How did people find out about Apple in the first place? How do we find out about any product or service? You got it. So when you think about it, even though this is our core competency, this phone doesn't mean anything if nobody knows about it. This phone doesn't mean anything if it's not marketed. If it doesn't have commercials that appear in your YouTube videos and promote the latest version of it. And so if you're working in HR in one of these companies, you're not just hiring people who build the chips for the phone or write the software. You're hiring marketing people. You're hiring people who can promote it, who can support it, who can write ads for the phone. It's all these things that go into your core competency, and there's a culture that goes into that as well. HR is at the center of all of these things. To that end, we're going to cover this slide, then we're going to take our first break of the class. We've got several assets in organizations. Obviously, we've got physical assets. Right now, you're in Schwab Hall. It's a physical asset. We can touch it. If we hit it, it makes a sound. We're here in Schwab Hall. St. Francis owns this place. We've got intellectual property. If you're Apple, it's not just your phone. It's the software that powers the phone. Who here's a video game? What's your favorite game? Fortnite. Can you imagine? Like, Fortnite, that's all stuff that doesn't really physically exist. It's all code. So that's intellectual property. It's something that maybe isn't tangible but that you own. Then you got financial. Does your company have money in the bank? Does it have assets that are worth things? So, and that aspect, a physical asset, can also be a financial. And then finally, you got the one we can control right here, which is people who make use of all these other things. People use physical assets and they add value to all the rest of it. Before we get to our next slide, I'm pausing for our first pause of the class. I would like a question or a comment from either side of the room. What would you like to ask or say? What do you do anything besides being a teacher? I'd love to be a professional musician. I think that'd be absolutely awesome. Well, but I'm not a professional. I don't do it for a living. No, I think either that or maybe if they had a job for a head beer taster someplace. Like I can do a killer. I don't get paid for it now though. I can do a killer job with that. What about you, Corey? If you could do anything that you don't have to worry about getting paid for, what would you do?
I really don't know. Like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know.
Nothing wrong with that answer, man. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Any question or comment from this side of the room? Anything you guys would like to ask? I know you're dying to ask something. Please.
If there's a place on this earth, where would you like to live?
So I can, and anyway, am I staying there the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And this might be an unusual answer.
Not here.
Colorado Springs. That's my favorite town in the United States. It's sunny almost all of the year. The people are awesome. The land is beautiful. The beer is cold. I would definitely settle there. What about you?
Probably something like Dominican Republic.
So you like it nice and warm.
Yeah.
I like winter. I like the cold. So that's why I'd stay in Colorado. But I still like the sun too. That's true. I can't argue that you have most things in Brazil. You got everything in Brazil. So, guys, we're going to get back into it because we talked about all these resources. Ultimately, what we're developing is what we refer to as human capital. Now, when you think about Ford, or you think about St. Francis University, or you think about Apple, all of these organizations develop different kinds of human capital because they're meant to do different things. Human capital means that the minds and abilities of the people in your organization change the face of the organization. For example, if you have somebody in Apple who's a coder who's making unique software, that changes the face of that organization. If you've got a head coach of a sports team at St. Francis University who's doing a great job, it changes the face of the organization. It changes the abilities of the organization. So intellectual capital reflects these things, how people think, what collective knowledge we're pulling into our organization, how we're responding to challenges, how we're dealing with things creatively, and finally, how are we making decisions? In other words, the people who run organizations have to know their own organizations. They have to work with the human capital to make decisions that are ultimately going to be good for the organization. In terms of intellectual capital, we talked a lot about Apple. Honda has intellectual capital. When you hear the word Honda, by the way, what are the first words that come to your mind? Cars. Reliable, really good cars. Because they develop great engines and transmissions that run forever. Google. When you say Google, what do you think of when you say Google? I'm sorry? Yeah, they are the internet. By show of hands here, who uses any search engine other than Google on a regular basis? What do you use? I'm sorry? Okay. Google's still the number one by a landslide. I mean, there are people using other search engines too, but they have achieved dominance in that field. By the way, guys, I know this isn't an MIS class. I just want to see if you give me the right answer here. Okay, in the last month, how many of you have used Google Maps? In the last month, how many of you have used Google Docs? In the last month, how many of you have used YouTube? Guys, why is Google giving us all this stuff for free? It wants information for what? Advertising. You got it. Their number one source of revenue is still advertising. That's why they give us all this stuff. But when we think of the intellectual capital, the algorithm that Google has developed, that means you want to be in their front search page, is their intellectual capital. The NFL's intellectual capital is they've found a way to develop sports entertainment like no other. I don't know if you guys realize this or not. Most of the new camera technology we have and enjoy in 2019 was developed because of Monday Night Football. The idea of slow motion cameras and the cameras that zoom over stadiums that are used for things like surveillance now were developed for Monday Night Football to make it an event. So that's intellectual capital. And don't even get me started on Disney. I think pretty soon Disney will own more than Google does. So these companies all have big intellectual capital because of people. Who here has seen a Disney film of some sort in the last month? Yeah, if you're into Marvel, if you're into Pixar, you've seen their stuff. So we talked about intellectual capital. We talked about core competencies. Ultimately, these three things in organizations cross over to make our employees our core competencies. If you're making something or if you're offering a service, That productivity matters to you. How many courses can your instructors teach, or how many cars can your team produce? That's your productivity. Your customer service is how committed are you to making sure people get good customer service. And finally, your organizational culture. Are you formal or informal? Are you welcoming or are you rigid? All these things cross over to employees being at the center of it. They make things. They represent the company to people, and they also build a brand and an organizational culture. When we think Google, we think accuracy. When we think Apple, we think well-made. When we think BMW, we think high line, and it's because of the way employees are tied into this stuff. So, moving on. In terms of productivity, by the way, guys, productivity is a big issue these days. Productivity, it's something we talk about, in terms of we're automated. More things are becoming automated these days. The average worker, whether it's in China or the United States, is far more productive than they were 50 years ago. Why is that? The average worker does more, yes.
Nowadays, you have way more information, access to information.
So we have access to information. We've got automation in our factories. We've got people who are doing more for themselves. With the exception of people in this room who live in New Jersey, how many of you have pumped your own gas in the last month? Guys, check this out. Prior to the 1970s in the United States, a self-service gas station was highly uncommon. Sheetz, who you guys all know, because we all love Sheetz, was one of the first chains in Pennsylvania to have self-service gas because people did not pump their own gas. Will we even think twice about it? Are you paying another 5 cents a gallon for somebody to pump the gas for you? That's exactly what is happening in places like grocery stores and restaurants now, that is going to change within 5 years. I predict within 5 years, other than for a few elderly folks who come through supermarkets, you're going to see the majority of them have self-checkout lines. If you had to guess, with 100% of all jobs that exist right now, out of every 10 jobs that exist in the United States right now, how many are going to disappear inside the next 10 years? Out of every 10. The estimates are 4 to 4.5 out of every 10 jobs will no longer exist. Is that good or bad, guys? So it can't be bad. How is it bad? Because it is bad. But it's good too. How is it bad?
Like unemployment rate for the raise just because people don't have a job, so it could affect the economy.
Absolutely. So we're talking more people who don't have that entry-level job. Other ways in which that could be good, this change in employment. How could it be good? Yes?
Everything would be easier.
So easier work? Yes.
The majority of the jobs that are getting taken are unskilled, so unfortunately,
So we're going to have people who are going to have to be trained to have more jobs. Yes? That's exactly right. You guys are all correct. What it comes down to is we're talking about jobs that don't currently exist that will be created inside the next 10 years. 10 years ago, drone pilot wasn't a job. 10 years ago, we did not have professional esports athletes making $20 million a year. These were professions that did not exist, but they will. So productivity, we talk about productivity, it means how efficiently can you make use of resources to produce a product or service. When we start talking about unit labor cost, all that means is if we made 50 cars and we had 10 employees, and it means each employee is making 5 cars, that's a unit labor cost. We can break that down to a per hourly cost. That's how we measure productivity in this day and age. And how do we improve productivity? Well, let me ask you this much. If we wanted to make sure that our company became more efficient and more productive, how could we do that? What are some approaches we could take? Let's say we're a factory and we're making smartphones. We want to be more efficient. What are things we should look at? What would you look at if it was your job to say, I've got to go and see how to make this company run more efficient? Where would you start? Yes? Absolutely. So how many people do we have? And with those workers, what else might you do? Yes? I sure would. I would ask people in terms of, well, in this environment, what are we doing right and what are we doing wrong? Absolutely. What else could we do? Those are great answers. What else can we do to find out? Ian, what can we do? If you wanted to find out how to make a company more productive, what's something you would examine to see if you could make it more productive? Analyze the workers. It's called job analysis. And we're going to be doing one of those in the next class, or not next class, the next chapter. Guys, what you can do to improve productivity. The first thing you can do is look at your organization as a whole. Are we organized efficiently? Do we have too many departments? Do we have redundancies? Do we have too many people? St. Francis, we're in the process of a reorganization right now ourselves. We can redesign the job. Who here has ever gone to a Subway? Raise your hand if you've been to a Subway. Will somebody tell me how they make a sandwich at Subway? Please.
Ask your type of bread you want. Of course, ask your type of sandwich you want. And then ask your type of bread. And then ask if you want to toast it. And then put the toppings, the sauces, and then ask if you want to combo it.
It's very efficient. Do you get your toast or do you keep it cool?
Depends on the sandwich.
What's your favorite sandwich, sir?
Probably the Chipotle steak.
Oh, nice choice. I'm still a fan of the BMT, actually. I still do the Italian. But my point is, in that job design, if this were the counter and I were the customer and you guys were working behind the counter, it's a very efficient process. From the moment I walk here till I get checked out, I don't have to walk around to do it. Compare that to making a sandwich in your own kitchen. That is no accident. That's called redesigning work. And so if we're not efficient, how can we more efficiently do this work? It might also be more efficient not to have people who can use touchscreens. Aligning HR activities means, are we actually making sure when we hire people that they match up with the needs of the organization? Are we drawing in the right people? And an outsourcing analysis finally means, are there things that you could be better off outsourcing to somebody else rather than doing it yourself? Outsourcing, by the way, when I say that word, we're going to outsource. Does that have a positive or negative connotation? How does that word make you feel? Positive or negative? Negative. And why? I agree. I hear that word and I feel the same thing. Why does it sound negative?
What we have right now is not enough.
So we lack the capabilities. Why else is it negative? What is it also associated with? What do you think? When we say we're going to outsource something, what do you think is going to happen to some of the people in your company? They're going to lose their jobs. So it's a word that has a negative connotation. In reality, it can also mean it's just a functional thing. I'll give you a great example. I know the Torvian and the soon-to-be extinct Frankies get a lot of hate in the classroom, but the bottom line is those those services were outsourced to another company because it made more financial sense to hire somebody else to do food than St. Francis, because St. Francis provides education. Our expertise is not food. That being said, some people say that the expertise of Frankie's wasn't food either. We'll see how the new food court goes. So questions so far. But the one thing I never understood of Frankie's is why it took an hour to get chicken fingers. Have you been in that movie? I literally waited. Oh, say that again?
Or 30 minutes for peanut butter and jelly.
Wow, so they're making the peanut butter. They're actually rolling the peanuts out. And it's like, this is freshly squeezed peanut butter. That's amazing. But yeah, the chicken fingers, to get really overdone chicken fingers took an hour and 15 minutes once. And I remember thinking, there's got to be something wrong here. Maybe we should have our class go down and do a job analysis or something. But in terms of customer service, guys, well, actually, beside Frankie's, will somebody give me an example of a time when they had terrible customer service in a restaurant? What happened?
Like the manager was our server. Our table, he was short staffed, and then just took it off for staff food and everything.
Did he make it up to you at all? Wow. So I would argue that parts of that all over are HR issues. Somebody who was calling the shots, whether it was the manager or the manager's manager, didn't know how to predict demand. And they certainly didn't know how to do customer service or were empowered to do so. Has anybody here ever had bad customer service where the server made it up to them by doing something nice? What happened?
We were at Ruby Tuesdays, and my mom ordered the salad bar, and she went up there, and all the plates were like disgusting, and she had the manager come up and look at them, and so they gave the lettuce for free.
Wow. So that's empowerment. And so that's an example, even if the system broke down, HR at least was in there somewhere. I would argue that 9 times out of 10, if you're getting bad quality or bad customer service, it's a bad process behind it and not necessarily always a bad person. The better you train your people and the more you empower them, the better results you're going to get in that regard. I think at that point, because we're going to be getting into some stereotypes about the HR department in the next couple of slides, we're going to call it right there. Before I let you go, though, guys, a couple of points. Number 1, remember to post your description of HR in Chapter 1's assignment. Number 2, start reading Chapter 1 in the text. And number 3, I will see you Friday. So have a wonderful afternoon, guys.